I'm Ernest Tremmel, and I graduated from the University of Wisconsin in civil engineering, and I went to work for the Corps of Engineers in St. Louis, and one of my bosses was a Captain Powell, who, after I was in St. Louis 2 years, got transferred to a secret project that he was going to work on called Manhattan Project Corps of Engineers we had. And he asked me if I'd like to go to Delaware with him. So I went to Delaware, and after I was there about a year and a half, one of the fellows I worked with, we were having a beer one night, and he says, I figured out what we're working on. And he had with him some comics that had portrayed of this big bomb. And he says, this is what we're working on. So being a young boy and very honest, I went to my boss and I said, we know what we're working on. He says, the hell you do. So I told him what it was. He says, oh my God. He says, so he brought us all in and told us, all right, got to keep this very secret. Don't talk about it or anything. So then I was there about a year, and they said, how would you like to go to California? And I says, I guess that'd be all right because I have an aunt out there. And so they sent me to Washington, D.C., and I found out that I was assigned to General Grove's office for 2 weeks with two other young engineers, one from Purdue and one from Ohio, to work there, to be sent out to work on this project. And I always remember General Groves was a very friendly person. I always felt at ease with him, even though we were young students. He would talk to us in the morning and say, hi, how are you doing? But I always was also disappointed that he was so overweight, that he didn't take, I thought, here's an important man in the service, and you'd think he'd worry about physically how he looked too, but I guess he was so absorbed in what he was doing. And then they gave me a telephone number and said, you're finally going to go to California after you'd been there 2 weeks, and we won't tell you where you're going to work. When you get to Los Angeles, call this telephone number. So I just had gotten married. When I went to Wilmington, I got married, so my wife was with me. So we went to California, and at that time there was a very bad housing shortage. So fortunately, she had an aunt, and her aunt took us in. And I called the number, and they told me you're working at an office called Calexico Engineering Company. And Calexico Engineering Company was a company that had offices in Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York. And it was set up to purchase parts for the research people on the atomic bomb at Los Alamos. But everything would be shipped to Los Angeles, and then from Los Angeles it would be sent out by Navajo freight train down to New Mexico, so it was a cover-up operation. And anyhow, we were in Los Angeles. I worked there about, about 2 years, and one night, after I'd been there not quite 2 years, some people came up from New Mexico. They would come back and forth all the time. Some of the people that worked down there, they'd bring them to Los Angeles to help procure and write specs and things. So we went out and had a few beers, and this guy said, well, he had too many. He says, I can tell you guys something you don't know that I know. We said, what's that? He said, they're going to explode an atomic bomb in about 10 days. And we all laughed at him. We thought, boy, this guy's had too much to drink. And sure enough, that was when the first bomb was exploded down in New Mexico. So that was a very interesting story. The other thing that was interesting out there is that after this operation went on for a few more years before the Atomic Energy Act was passed, and that was after Japan bombs. And then I don't know whatever happened to the office, because I ended up going to Chicago to work at Argonne National Lab. And there I worked for about 2 years on just all kinds of nuclear energy. And I got to tell this one story, that while I was in Chicago, no, it wasn't in Chicago. I worked there a while, then from Chicago I went to Cincinnati, and General Electric was hired to develop a nuclear-propelled airplane, and they were using a water reactor. I worked there 2 years, and then I became the manager up in Connecticut to develop a liquid metal reactor to fly an airplane. And while I was from there, I transferred to Washington, D.C., and at the time I was there, I'm trying to remember who the guy was that was Director McCone, Chairman McCone, who had been building He'd been head of the Kaiser outfit that built all the ships that unloaded the tanks when they raided Europe. He was the chairman, and I always remember he said that I worked for Commissioner Floberg. There were 5 commissioners, and McCone says, I'm not going to be around here maybe only a couple years, so you all get out there. I want to build the first nuclear power plant in this country. And so I put together some charts to show him that it was like 15 years away before you would have the first nuclear power plant, things we had to learn. We had to go through licensing. And he says, who put this silly report together? I'm not waiting 15 years. But my boss was a lawyer, Fulberg, and he says, well, that's the way it is, Mr. McCone. So he finally realized that he wasn't going to see a nuclear plant built while he was chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission. So then they sent me out my boss asked me, would you like to see a nuclear explosion? I said, yes. So they sent me out to Los Alamos to watch one of the tests. And that was very interesting because we were on a little hill and the bomb was way down in the long ways away. Far enough away you could hardly see what they were doing. And about that time, all the bad luck, I had to go to the bathroom. And all they had out there was one of these outhouses there. And so I went in there. While I was in there, I heard this big noise go off. I thought, oh my God, I came all the way out here and I missed the explosion. So I ran out with my pants hanging half down, and they all were laughing. They said, no, that's some preliminary testing they do to see which way the wind's blowing. So I didn't miss the bomb. And when that thing exploded, it was what I couldn't get over. You saw the flash, but you just sat there, and all of a sudden this heat wave came. You could see it blowing, grass blowing down, and then it hit us. And boy, that was hot, even as far as we were away. But boy, that was impressive. So then I spent quite a few years. Most of my career was spent then in Washington, where Jim Schlesinger was a chairman for a while. We had, I'm trying to remember the lady now, Dixie Lee Ray. And Dixie Lee Ray was funny because she was a little on the heavy side. She always had her dogs. Even when you went in her office, her 2 dogs, or sometimes she had 3, were sitting on the Davenport. She had to make one of them get off so you could sit down. And when I first met her, I was at a reception, and she had this beautiful maroon coat, and it looked so nice. I said, Chairman, that coat is just beautiful as you have. And she said, what's your name? I said, Ernie. She says, Ernie, I want to tell you a secret. I said, I had to buy this in a man's store. I can't find any women's clothes to fit me. Wasn't that? I thought it was kind of funny. So we worked on, while I was there, fortunately I had a chance to work on almost every kind of a nuclear reactor there is, gas-cooled, natural and boiling water, pressurized water. I was just very lucky that I was able to do that. And while I was there, I ended up in a job which was to show utilities how to build nuclear plants. I was supposed to be we had a public relations office, but I was in a separate office, which was, they could come and ask me what the economics were and if they could build one on their system. And I remember when they built the reactor out in Portland, the one man that became president of Portland was the man that came in, and Chairman Seaberg sent me out there with him to look at the site and give them a briefing on nuclear power and how it worked and so forth. So it's pretty exciting. I was very lucky, and when I was out there, I always remember that Oregon has these berries, I guess they call them boysenberries. They have in Los Angeles too. They're so delicious. On that site where they built the reactor was loaded with these berries. We ate so many that day we all were sick that night. I always remember that. The other thing I remember about going out to Oregon is Portland is the delicious salmon. Poached. Have you ever had poached salmon? Poached salmon, just delicious. So that was a great trip. And then I also remember going down to Duke Power, and the guy, Mr. Lee, who became the president of Duke Power at that time, was a young engineer, and he was my slide projector assistant to run the slides that I had to show him. And Bill Lee. And then eventually he became president. He died a few years ago of a heart attack. But then I also was sent down to Florida to meet with McGregor Smith, who was chairman of the board of Florida Power and Light. And at that time, we built Turkey Point, and we built 2 reactors. They were the cheapest reactors that were ever built in this country, and it was kind of interesting because McGregor Smith took Chairman Seaberg and I out for a ride in their dune buggy, those buggies they have, so we could see all the marshland there, and that was very interesting. And at that time, the reason this chairman was a very interesting man, McGregor Smith. He says, Ernie, I want you to stay overnight if you can. I've got to learn more about SWUs. He called it, SWU is a name for an enriching degree of enrichment of the uranium. And he says, I've been hearing all about those SWUs. Tonight you come on over to my house for dinner, and I'd appreciate if you'd spend an hour or 2 with me explaining SWUs and what they're about. So I did that. It was kind of interesting. And he was a character. He came from Missouri, and he took me out to get me a beer. And he had this one tavern he went to. They had a special chair in the corner with a bell above it, and that was his chair. And he could ring the bell when he was ready for more drinks. So it was really very exciting. One of the exciting things was the trying to build a reactor to build a nuclear airplane. Turned out to be a very tough job because of the weight you're worried about, and they envisioned that the first design they had, like if you and I were going to go to the airplane, they'd have this a little pathway lined up with lead shields on both sides. You'd walk between them, so you'd be shielded from the radiation from the plane and go inside the plane through a heavily shielded door. And that became almost, I think eventually they could have had an airplane and they would have been able to design it, but meantime the Polaris missile and the submarine were successful, so they decided they didn't need two systems. One was the system that would do it. And the other interesting thing I feel very lucky about is that when I worked for Commissioner Floberg, Admiral Rickover was in his prime time, and he was always inviting the commissioners out to see the submarines. So he invited Commissioner Floberg, and because I was assistant, I was invited too, to go have dinner on the Nautilus up in Connecticut in the bay. And so I flew up separately because Mr. Floberg had to come later, and I flew up a little ahead of time. And who meets me at the airport but Admiral Rickover, and he paid my taxi fare to the place where we had dinner that night under the ocean. And a lot of people didn't believe it because he was known to be pretty tight. They couldn't believe that he paid my taxi fare. But he was a very exciting guy. And the other incident I had with him that was fun was we had the campaign when Glenn Seaberg was there. He made me head of the group to sell war bonds. And so we always had a quota to meet. And the problem we had, the naval reactor people under Rickover never would buy any war bonds. They were always pulled us down because other people would buy them and they wouldn't. So Glenn Seaberg, see what you can do with the Admiral. See if you can't talk him into getting some people to buy some of these bonds. So I called him and he said, it's such a great cause. I'm so sympathetic. I wish I could get all my people to buy those bonds, but my people are enlisted men. They don't make enough money to buy saving bonds. But he says, you're welcome. Why don't you come? I'll call a meeting and you come and try and sell them. I said, Admiral, it's very easy. All you have to do is tell them you want them each to buy a bomb, and that's it. Buy a bond. And he said, oh, Ernie, you wouldn't want me to do that. I would never coerce anybody. He gave me, I call it the glad hand treatment, so they didn't buy any bonds. I didn't do very well. And the other guy that was a commissioner at the time was Tommy Thompson from MIT, and he was a brilliant young scientist. And I got to know him pretty well, and I asked him to buy some saving bonds, and Tommy says he really believed in it, but he said, I'm having trouble existing already on the cell, even though I'm a commissioner with my family. I don't make a lot of money, and I don't think I have enough right now, but in a year or so I'm hoping to be able to start buying some saving bonds for my children. Well, Tommy went out to Nevada, and while he was out there, he and another commissioner took a trip looking over the big dam, Hoover Dam there, or whatever it is, and their helicopter crashed and sunk, and all of them died. And by the time they got their bodies out, they were all dead. And one of the my best friend, who was his assistant, was excited about going along. He drowned it also. So that was a terrible thing. We lost a commissioner that way. So I always remember that. And that's about a lot of things I've told you, that were a lot of fun for me. I always considered so fortunate to have been and lived when I did and doing all those things. That every day was exciting. I remember we went to Japan right after the war, and I was with Chairman McCone and Dr. Wilson and the president of Westinghouse, and we had a bridge game. I was the fourth, and all these guys were great bridge players. And fortunately, my partner was Dr. Wilson, who was a brain, and I knew if he gave me a dirty look that shouldn't do what I was about to bid or something, see. And we did all right. We were flying to Hawaii, and so that was very interesting, playing bridge with the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission and commissioner and the president of Westinghouse. So I was in pretty good company. And when we got to Hawaii, we left early in the morning to go to Japan, and when we got there that night, we went out to have a few drinks. I can't remember what the drink was, but a couple I had, but I didn't wake up. They woke me up in the morning. It was time to catch the plane. I didn't get to go to church or anything. I slept so long. But it was working for the Atomic Energy Commission. It was so exciting. And back in those days when I worked in Los Angeles, we had a top priority. There was only one priority. One program in the United States during the war had a higher priority than the atomic bomb, and that was the program to build these big tankers that unloaded the troops that landed to invade. And that's what Mr. McCone was head of that company that made those. And they had a higher priority than us. But next to that, I would pick up the phone and call Stanley Screwdriver and ask for the president. And when I'd say, give my priority number, they'd write to them right away. And I said, we need 100 of this kind of screwdriver shipped to Los Alamos immediately. That was it. But we had such a high priority. It was really fantastic. When the 2 weeks was in Washington, forgot to tell you that part of the time we were in there, they were training us to tell us what the priority system is, where we fit in, and what we should help the Los Angeles do. We were sent to different offices to help them know what the priority system was. So it was very, very exciting. And that's about a summary of, unless you've got any questions.
Well, I've just appreciate your sharing all these things. This is great. I trying to think of anything else that you might want to share that has to do with the Manhattan Project.
I can't think of a lot, except I know that another interesting part of the Manhattan Project was that the couple of these fellows came to Los Angeles, and I went with them out to this little guy that had an electronics shop in the back of his home. And the reason we went there, they were at that time, they were studying to explode the bomb with a gun, but this was an implosion to surround the bomb with these like firecrackers that go off and cause an implosion. And this company was the only company in the United States that they could find that had any experience in making those kind of particular, I call them firecrackers, but things that would explode. And it was interesting to me because actually when they decided he could do it, then they assigned security guys to watch that day and night, and so nobody could know what he was doing, but so nobody could get at it. And he was successful in making some of the first explosions that they wrapped around the bomb to make it, called an implosion. And that impressed me, that how far we would go and send people there, and they would take over this guy's place and pay him. He got paid well, but made him do nothing but that for us. And of course it was interesting because it was very tough to find a place to live in Los Angeles, and fortunately my wife's aunt was married to a guy we called Smiling Tom, and Tom ran a used car business, and they only handled only handled Lincolns and Cadillacs. So every time when we needed a car, we had to either a Cadillac or a Lincoln, so that was pretty nice. And he was Irish, and even though he'd never been to Notre Dame, he gave him so much money that they made him an honor student. Gave him an honor degree. But those are all little things that happened during the war that were very exciting to me. And to this day, I'm still working on nuclear stuff now. To this day, I'm still doing part-time work. Been working hard on Yucca Mountain, and some other things we're working on is we're looking now at accelerators. If we can get an accelerator that can zap a nuclear waste and neutralize the nuclear waste so it will only have a 200 or 300 year half-life instead of 1,000,000 years, you can do that. What you'd do is you'd separate the plutonium and uranium out and use those over, and then the accelerator could sap all those bad stuff like cesium and would neutralize it so that you could store it, and it would decay within 200 or 300 years instead of 1,000,000. So that shows what they're working on now. It's getting very exciting. And I tell people, we got to send the stuff to Yucca Mountain, but you don't want to bury it because our grandchildren are going to mine that stuff. It's going to be very valuable to them someday when there's a shortage of water and, of electricity. So, but that's some of the things I'm working on now part-time. And I work a lot I go up in the Congress as a technical advisor, and that's a lot of fun because you can go and meet our two senators from Wisconsin are very good friends of mine, Cole and Feingold, and we have a couple of congressmen from Wisconsin. But it's people still, if you can tell them about nuclear energy and they understand it, then they understand why we need it.